In March 2020, as the world's airlines watched their revenue collapse to nearly zero in a matter of weeks, Air Europa was facing extinction. The Spanish carrier, headquartered in Palma de Mallorca, had built its identity around a single corridor, Madrid to Latin America. 22 long-haul routes across the Atlantic, a fleet of Boeing 787s, and 4,600 employees. By 2020, all of it was grounded. The Spanish state intervened through SEPI with a €475 million rescue loan, the largest pandemic-era lifeline granted to any private Spanish company. One missed payment, one regulatory rejection, one failed restructuring meant collapse. For nearly 5 years since, European aviation has accepted a painful truth. Cross-border airline consolidation is essentially impossible. EU ownership rules cap foreign control at 49%. Competition authorities block obvious mergers. Geography and regulation always win. Then, in August 2025, Turkish Airlines committed €300 million to take a stake of roughly 26% in Air Europa, structured as a €275 million convertible loan, plus €25 million in direct equity. The Spanish Council of Ministers formally approved the foreign investment in June 2026. Final closing remains pending European Commission review, expected late 2026. But here's what makes no sense. Turkish Airlines is not buying control. It is not merging Air Europa into its operation. It's not even becoming the largest shareholder, with Globalia retaining around 54%. 26% does not buy a Spanish airline, it does not deliver Madrid, it does not consolidate Latin America. Yet, every major European airline group, Lufthansa, Air France-KLM, and IAG, is watching this transaction with genuine concern. The deal, that looks too small to matter, is reshaping the competitive map of an entire continent. So, how can €300 million for a minority stake in Spain's second airline threaten empires built over decades? To understand why Turkish Airlines is betting €300 million on influence rather than control, we need to understand why this kind of cross-border airline expansion was considered nearly impossible for so long. Turkish Airlines already flies almost everywhere. Its network covers more countries than any other airline on Earth. Istanbul sits at one of the best-located global hubs in commercial aviation, connecting Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East within efficient flying ranges. The physics of geography favored Istanbul for almost every flow on the planet. Almost. Latin America was one of the exceptions. Istanbul to Buenos Aires is roughly 13,000 kilometers. Istanbul to Santiago pushes beyond practical non-stop economics for most wide-body aircraft. Istanbul to Lima requires either an aircraft purpose-built for ultra-long haul or a stopover that erases the convenience advantage. The economics were unforgiving. Long-haul routes from Istanbul to Latin America are operationally expensive, hard to schedule, exposed to aircraft availability constraints, and dependent on strong, wide-body economics that work better on shorter sectors. Madrid, by contrast, sits naturally on the Europe-Latin America axis. Spain shares language, history, business networks, and migration patterns with the entire region. Iberia turned this geographic advantage into one of the most defensible hub positions in European aviation. Air Europa built itself as the second player at Madrid, with over 20 Latin America routes across the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. Not the biggest, not the dominant carrier, but a functioning Atlantic gateway, with traffic rights and crews. For Turkish Airlines, this created an existential strategic problem. The eastward network was nearly complete, but Latin America represented hundreds of thousands of passengers annually that Istanbul could not efficiently capture. Turkish could fly further from Istanbul, or it could buy into the place where the traffic already wants to flow. Then in 2019, IAG attempted a partial answer. The owner of Iberia and British Airways announced it would acquire Air Europa outright, consolidating Madrid into a single, dominant Latin America gateway under one corporate roof. The logic was obvious. Iberia plus Air Europa would create unrivaled Spanish dominance across the Atlantic. Routes could be rationalized, slots could be redistributed. Madrid would become for Latin America what Heathrow is for North Atlantic premium traffic. But the thing is, the European Commission saw exactly the same logic and called it a competition problem. In December 2021, IAG terminated its agreement to buy Air Europa outright. It has retained a stake, tried again, and by 2024 dropped its second attempt to buy the airline outright. IAG still has a stake in Air Europa. That left Air Europa stranded. It had survived the pandemic on Spanish state money, but it needed capital. It needed a partner, and the European groups had collectively decided it was uninvestable. Then, in August 2025, Turkish Airlines stepped forward with something the European players could not offer. Not a takeover, not a merger, a minority position, structured specifically to avoid the antitrust trap that destroyed IAG's attempt. What Turkish Airlines agreed to create represents a carefully engineered equity transaction. The €300 million investment was structured as a €275 million convertible loan, plus a €25 million direct equity purchase. Upon conversion, Turkish would hold approximately 26% of Air Europa. Globalia will retain majority control at around 54%. IAG's legacy 20% stake remains intact. For now, why accept such a constrained position? Well, it comes down to EU ownership law. You see, every EU airline must remain majority owned by EU nationals and effectively controlled by them to retain its operating rights. By staying at 26%, Turkish Airlines stays well below the 49% foreign ownership ceiling. 26% is not control, but in airline politics, it is enough to be in the room. The structure also includes binding commercial agreements covering codeshare integration, revenue sharing on key corridors, schedule coordination, and a board seat for Turkish Airlines. The equity gets Turkish into the boardroom. The commercial joint venture ensures Air Europa's network actually responds to Istanbul's strategic demands. The stake has effectively become a bespoke instrument, purpose-built to extract maximum strategic value while accepting regulatory constraints that would have killed any conventional takeover. But before committing €300 million to Air Europa itself, Turkish Airlines studied the corridor mathematics in ways no European competitor had attempted. Spain-Latin America traffic specifically continued growing through 2024, with millions of passengers moving across the Atlantic via Madrid annually. Traditional thinking assumed network expansion meant flying more routes from your own hub. Equity access to existing traffic flows could deliver network growth faster, cheaper, and with less regulatory risk than organic route launches. A single Istanbul-Buenos Aires route would require a custom long-range widebody, years of bilateral negotiations, slot acquisitions at both ends, and uncertain demand. The same capital deployed as equity in Air Europa instantly delivered access to existing Latin American routes operated by aircraft already crewed, already certified, and already selling tickets. Codeshare integration could place a Turkish TK flight number on every Madrid Latin America sector, allowing Turkish to sell tickets from Delhi to Bogota under a single itinerary. Through ticketing eliminates the friction that traditionally separated Eastern and Western network airlines. A passenger checks one bag, holds one boarding pass per leg, and remains protected if a connection slips. Network reach does not require flying every route yourself, it requires structural access to the routes that already work. Turkish Airlines is buying a stake in an airline that already holds slots, aircraft, crews, route authorities, regulatory approvals, and a brand recognized across Latin America. Each daily Madrid Latin America rotation requires roughly 1 to 2 widebody aircraft. Air Europa operates this network at scale. This seems irrational by traditional metrics. Airlines typically optimize for fleet ownership and operational control. More controlled aircraft means more direct revenue. But Turkish Airlines' logic is strategic rather than operational. You see, the investment doesn't attempt to replace Iberia at Madrid. Iberia will still dominate Madrid Latin America premium traffic. IAG will continue running the largest operation across the Atlantic from Spain. These carriers serve passengers who already chose Iberia for direct connectivity, frequent flyer reasons, or One World Alliance benefits. And not just business travelers, I'm talking premium economy, leisure, and connecting traffic as well. The vast majority of the established Madrid Latin America market remains in IAG's hands. What Turkish Airlines does is create a new layer above existing options. For passengers flowing from Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia, who currently route through Frankfurt or Paris or London to reach Latin America, Istanbul plus Madrid offers something no competitor can match. Limited equity, structured below control thresholds, creates value through regulatory acceptance, rather than market power. Turkish isn't just paying for a stake, it's paying for the only structure Brussels might actually approve. A flight can give you a route. Equity can give you a network. The investment sits atop a carefully designed strategic architecture. Turkish Airlines is simultaneously expanding its wide-body fleet with custom-configured Airbus A350-1000 ultra-long-haul aircraft expected from late 2027, capable of operating 17-hour non-stop sectors to Buenos Aires, Santiago, Sydney, and Melbourne directly from Istanbul. The Air Europa stake doesn't generate the majority of Turkish's Latin America revenue. It establishes the network position that supports the eventual direct routes. When the A350-1000s arrive, Turkish will already have codeshare flows and customer recognition across Latin America, prepared by years of Air Europa cooperation. The minority stake elevates the entire eastward network by giving it a western anchor that makes through ticketing seamless across continents that previously required multiple separate purchases. Most European airlines cannot replicate this structure immediately. Lufthansa already deployed its consolidation capital into ITA Airways, taking 41% with a path to full control sooner rather than later. Air France-KLM is committed to SAS, acquiring 19.9% and intending to increase its stake to 60.5%. Both groups exhausted their political capacity for new cross-border deals. Regulatory geometry presents another barrier. IAG cannot increase its Air Europa stake meaningfully because the EU competition case against IAG Iberia Air Europa consolidation remains structurally unresolved. Any IAG move could reopen the antitrust review that killed the original takeover. Geographic complementarity doesn't support the strategy from most locations. Lufthansa cannot use Frankfurt or Munich to access Latin America more efficiently through Madrid because Frankfurt-Madrid Latin America is a worse routing than Frankfurt direct for most of Lufthansa Group's flows. The Turkish advantage works specifically because Istanbul's eastward strength has no natural Latin America extension. Buying Madrid access is genuinely additive, not duplicative. Yet, every European carrier must now account for what Turkish is demonstrating. The assumption that EU ownership rules prevent meaningful non-EU strategic positions is now suddenly vulnerable to careful structuring. The assumption that minority stakes deliver only financial returns is no longer absolute. European groups build consolidation strategies on full control. That control becomes less essential when commercial joint ventures plus 26% equity plus board representation can deliver most of the same network synergy without triggering antitrust review. The mergers that require full control today might not require full control tomorrow. The race among European groups to secure remaining strategic targets, particularly TAP Air Portugal, is accelerating precisely because they recognize the competitive implications. IAG wanted consolidation. Turkish just funded competition. 26% doesn't scale ownership. It scales influence. The Spanish Council of Ministers authorized the foreign direct investment on June 4, 2026, imposing strict conditions to ensure Air Europa continues fulfilling state defense and repatriation contracts. But European Commission approval remains pending. Turkish Airlines is 49.12% state-owned by the Turkish government. If the European Commission imposes conditions or blocks the conversion, the convertible loan could revert to standard debt, leaving Air Europa financially exposed after having already spent the proceeds on SEPI repayment. The deal may be announced in 1 year and truly felt in another. For passengers, the deal could mean more ways to cross the world without flying through the obvious legacy hubs. A traveler from Delhi to Lima could route through Istanbul and Madrid on a single integrated ticket, with baggage protection and connection guarantees. For Spain, the outcome preserves Spanish majority control of Air Europa, recovers the largest pandemic-era loan ever granted to a private Spanish company, and prevents Iberia from consolidating Madrid into a single airline fortress. Spain keeps Air Europa Spanish, but gives it a Turkish engine. For Air Europa's employees, job preservation was central to the political acceptability of the transaction. For IAG, the outcome is awkward. IAG retains 20% of Air Europa, but is now overshadowed by a larger, strategic shareholder pursuing a different agenda. IAG wanted Air Europa because it fit too well. Turkish could buy in because it fit just awkwardly enough. For Turkish Airlines, Air Europa becomes the missing western wing of Istanbul's global architecture. The Latin American routes, the Madrid slots, the EU operating certificate, the cargo flows across the Atlantic, the maintenance cooperation potential. All of it becomes accessible through €300 million and a carefully written shareholders agreement. But the risks remain real. Latin American currency volatility devastates airline economics. A minority stake can open doors. It cannot force the whole building to move. The Turkish Airlines investment is a deliberate choice to build something that didn't exist before. Not a compromise dictated by emergency, but a carefully structured instrument designed to demonstrate that European aviation consolidation is no longer limited to full mergers between EU groups. When Brussels eventually rules on the investment, when the convertible loan converts to equity, when the first integrated Istanbul-Madrid-Buenos Aires through ticket sells, Air Europa will complete a transformation that took 6 years to make possible.